working in any sort of publication, such as a newspaper, with books, with web pages, you're most likely going to be working within a workspace or a document that uses multiple elements or parts. Now, when you have all of these elements or parts, you're going to need to combine them and group them together in a way that makes sense for the audience to get your message forward with them. This is where the idea of Gestalt psychology comes in. So, a Gestalt is a German word that means that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This has been theorized ever since the 1920s and has actually developed its own kind of school of thought, Gestalt psychology, which places the importance of examining all of the parts of a situation over focusing on specific areas. So, the idea of Gestalt psychology was developed in 1923 by German psychologist Max Wertheimer in his article that he calls the Dot Study. So, in the Dot Study article, he goes over 5 or 6 main Gestalt principles which we'll be focusing on today, and according to him, those 5 main Gestalt principles, those principles of grouping, are proximity, which is the general tendency according to which single items are integrated or segmented; similarity, which describes the perceptual tendency to group items together; and common fate, which describes the perceptual tendency according to which stimulus objects that change together in location or that move together are grouped; good continuation, which is the tendency that parts that create coherent continuity are grouped together; closure or completion, which refers to the perceptual tendency to unite incomplete or partially interrupted figures; and then lastly, he talks about figure ground, which in and of itself is not a principle that he mentioned, which wasn't a principle at the time, but figure ground refers to distinguishing things against their background. So, I have some examples for you today of each of them. We're going to start with proximity. Here we have the famous IBM logo, and you can see with the logo that it's made up of a bunch of blue bars that are varying in both size and shape. So if you had all of these bars together and they're kind of spread out, it wouldn't make sense that it's the IBM logo, but with their proximity to each other in the places that they're set, it forms the letters IBM. Next we have similarity, and there are a few ways that you can group similarity. Here's a good example that has, it uses red and white squares and circles, and there's 2 ways you can group these. You can group them by the shape, so you can see in the columns, you can group them by the circles, or you can group them by the color, so it's horizontal, you have the red and the white. The next one is common fate. This one's kind of hard to show in a picture because it deals with more moving objects, but this is a pretty good representation. So we have 6 dots, 3 of which have arrows to signify that they're going to move down, and we have 3 dots that have arrows that are going to signify that they're moving up. So the common fate refers to their endpoints, their fate, which is where they're going to end up. So when these 3 dots move up and these 3 dots move down, we're going to group them together in the direction that they go, because these 3 dots are eventually going to be up here, while these 3 will be down here. Common fate. The next principle is continuation. Here we have a bunch of dots that can be perceived in a few different ways. On the most basic level, we can see them as trails of dots, 4 trails of dots that are heading over to a specific midpoint. But our brains see them as 2 lines that are intersecting each other, one vertical and one horizontal. To prove this even further, we have the horizontal and the verticals different colors. So these are in red, but we wouldn't see them grouped with the red because we're conditioned to see them as 2 intersecting paths. The next one we have is closure. One of the most famous examples of this is the World Wildlife Fund's logo, which is this panda up here. So the idea of closure is that you have this kind of abstract image that isn't in and of itself closed, but we perceive it as closed. The top of the panda doesn't have anything that closes it off, yet we still perceive it as one solid object, one panda, even though there's nothing to kind of separate it from the background. And finally, we have probably the most famous principle, which is figure ground. I'm sure you guys have all seen this before. It's pretty much a staple of optical illusions, and it's primarily used when describing the principles. So this one's a really good one because you have this base on the outside, the black middle, and then you have on the outside you have two people kissing. So you have to distinguish between the two of the background and the foreground being the vase, and the background being the two people kissing. So Gestalt psychology is very important to remember when working with design elements, because you need to be able to manipulate all of your elements and parts together to create one cohesive whole. Now, the examples that I show were a bit extreme, but when you think about things like, web pages, books, you have, for example, chapter headings are usually going to be bolded to signify that those are going to group together as chapter headings. Knowing this, you can make your publication the best it can be, and you can drive forward a message that your audience is going to subconsciously understand. Thank you.